Hello and welcome to my latest online tutorial where we're going to be talking about graphs and the essential elements that you need to include on your graph when you're submitting work to the IB. And we're also going to talk about how to insert error bars on a graph correctly. This is obviously all going to happen in Excel because that's what you're going to be using on your MacBooks. If you're using anything else, the steps might differ slightly. As we can see, we've got the data that we've previously been using, and that is consisting of two groups and the height of those two different groups. We've already done the calculations at the bottom here, so we have the number of data in each set, the average and the standard deviation. When we produce our graph, what we're going to be graphing then is actually the average of the two different groups. I'm going to highlight the data that I want to graph, and I'm going to click up here, insert, and then I'm going to select the type of graph that I want to use. Now you'll notice that there's different types of charts that I can select, so a pie chart, or I can use an area graph or a scatter graph, but I'm going to choose a column graph. And I'm going to choose the type of column graph that I want. It's a clustered column. Click on that and it automatically appears in my sheet. I can vary the chart design if I want to. I've got here then a number of different labels on the chart that I might need, so a chart title, but I'm also missing some others. I might include axis labels, I might need a legend and things like that. If I want to change the layout of my chart, I can go up here on the left-hand side to the quick layout function, and I can select whichever one of these most closely fits the characteristics that I want to have my chart to include. I'm going to click on this one. Now you'll notice that it's got a legend in the corner here. I don't need that because I've only got two different groups. I can get rid of that by clicking on it and deleting. You'll also notice I've got an x-axis title. Now what I want this to be, my x-axis title, is actually going to be Group A and Group B, the two different groups. I don't need a title there really, but I do need a y-axis title. So I've got that there and I've got my chart title. So let's introduce a chart title. So chart number 1, notice I'm giving it a number because it will relate to the data table that I include in my final write-up. So chart 1 will show graphically the data which is in table 1. It'll also mean that in my conclusion I can make reference to something that is shown in chart 1. I'm going to give it a title, so it's going to be average height of two populations. That's going to change my chart title. I can also change my axis title on the left hand side here, and I'm just going to call that height, and I'm going to include the units as well. Now in a bit of time we're going to talk about uncertainties and how that's calculated, and this is where your uncertainties would also go in this axis title. I can see here on my x-axis the labels are just arbitrarily given by Excel, but actually I want that to be Group A and Group B. So what I need to do is click up here where it says Select Data, and you'll notice there's a box here that says Horizontal Axis Labels. I can click on that, and then I'm going to click and drag over to the labels that I've been using on my original sheet. Hit return, and that will, as you can see, change the labels to Group A and Group B. Next I want to try and add some error bars. So error bars are a way of graphically representing the standard deviation or the variance of the data that we've got in front of us. In order to add error bars, I'm going to go up to this top left hand corner and click on Add Chart Element. And I'm going to go down to error bars. Now there's a couple of different options here. I can add standard error, percentage, or standard deviation. I don't want you to use this standard deviation here because I want to use the standard deviation that we've calculated. So I'm going to click down on the next option, which is more error bar options. And on the right hand side of the screen, it's going to appear this window. Click on custom and then specify value, and this window will appear. Now our positive and our negative standard deviations are exactly the same, so both of these need to have the same numbers in them. So I'm going to delete that, and all I'm going to do is drag and drop over the standard deviation that we calculated on the original sheet. I'm going to do the same for the negative error values. And then I'm going to hit return. You'll notice two things have happened now. The y-axis has changed so that it now starts at 0. And you will also have noticed that the error bars will have appeared. And you can check to see that the error bars are roughly the right size. So we can see from our data table here that our standard deviation for group B should be much smaller than our standard deviation for group A. And we can see here group B's got a much smaller standard deviation error bar than group A. So the IB will expect you to be able to redistribute graphs to allow the data to be interpreted more easily. And as we can see with this graph, nothing really happens until about 150 centimeters of height. So actually the difference between the two data sets here is quite hard to tell because the graph shows all of this information down at the bottom which isn't necessarily needed. What we can do is we can cut it so that our y-axis starts at say 100. And that will mean that we'll be able to see the difference between the two data sets much more easily. The way that we can do that is if we double click on the axis and we scroll down to the bottom where it says format axis here. And again on the right hand side this window will appear and we can just type in what we want our minimum value for our y-axis to be. I've decided it's going to be 100. All of a sudden we can see that that opens the difference between the two data sets here. It also shows us a bit more detail about the standard deviations that we've got there as well. This is how we add error bars and this is how we start to format the graphs correctly for the IB. Any questions? Send me an email and let me know.